Hi, good evening and welcome and Happy New Year to everyone in the room and any of those that are watching online. Thank you so much for coming along tonight. So we're here for Children's Overview and Scrutiny Committee looking at the safety valve. Sort of invite that DFV have asked whether we would participate in. And just before we start, I'll ask the Democratic Service Officer to read out the housekeeping notice.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting of the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chairman in case of disruptions. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the service car park at the front of the annex. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Move on to the agenda item number 1, apologies. Do we have any apologies for the meeting, please?
Apologies have been received by Councillor Cooper and Peter Martin.
Thank you. And do we have any substitute members, please?
Councillor Canabanis, a substitute member for Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Agenda item number 3, do we have any declarations of interest, please? Councillor Harman.
Thank you, Chair. Following advice from the monitoring officer, I will declare that I have a family member, whilst they're not in receipt of an EHCP or we're not even in the official process at the moment of applying for one, in the not too distant future, we will be applying for one. Just to say as well, if at any point during the meeting I feel that I need to step out because of conflict of interest, I will do so. I'll declare and leave the meeting.
Councillor Ball.
I have a family member who's in receipt of a EHCP through BCP Council, but I have received a dispensation for this meeting.
Thank you. I also have a family member who's in receipt of an EHCP with BCP Council. I also have dispensation to remain within the meeting. Thank you. Sorry. Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Following advice from the monitoring officer, I declare that I have a very close family friend who I have helped with their EHCP and their subsequent admission to a special needs school in BCP. So if I feel at any point I feel compromised, I will excuse myself from the meeting.
Thank you. So next, public issues. Do we have any public issues, please?
3 questions and 1 statement has been received from Adam Sofianis. If you would take the microphone to say those. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks again to the committee and to officers for preparing for this meeting and facilitating it. I have 3 questions in the statement. Question 1. As we know, there's currently a statutory override in effect for the dedicated schools grant deficits. The override has been ring-fencing that accumulating deficit and keeping it off the main balance sheet. Paragraph 38 of Appendix 1 suggests that if the override is not extended this year, then the Council would need to issue a Section 114 notice in December this year. But the override is not currently due to expire until 31st March 2026. So can Council just confirm and explain in more detail its view on when any such notice would need to be issued? Thank you.
Councillor Burton has got a response.
Thank you, Mr. Sofianis, for answering the question and giving me the opportunity to explaining this in a bit more detail. The statutory override falls away on the 31st of March 2026. This means in settling the budget for the financial year 1st of April 25 to the 31st of March 2026, it will need to recognise that the override will not exist at the end of that period and therefore would not be able to set a legally balanced budget for that financial year, as at the end of the period it will have a negative reserve position. Consideration in respect of a Section 114 report will be needed as a minimum in late 2024 if the matter has not been resolved before then.
Thank you. Question 2. The scenarios set out in Appendix 1 do not include the government contributions which would be expected under any safety valve contract. Agreed contracts would be published in April 2024. But right now, these figures are essential to understanding what an overall safety valve package would look like. So, can the Council confirm what safety valve contributions have been proposed by Council and/or Government? And have any such contributions been included in calculations for the Council's forthcoming budget? And how much, if so? Thank you.
Thank you for the second question. The proposal has been submitted to the DfE. During January, we will receive feedback from the DfE with regards to the next steps and any government contributions relating to the safety valve proposal. Until this work has been completed, there have been no changes to the Council's budget in this regard.
Thank you. Question 3. Paragraph 44 is entitled Summary of Equality Implications. Yet this simply states that the purpose of the DSG management plan is to address the financial sustainability of support for pupils with additional needs. Obviously, this is not, in fact, an equality statement. But has the Council conducted an equality impact assessment in relation to the safety valve scenarios here? And if so, what are its conclusions?
Thank you again, Mr. Sapianis. This is quite a short answer, I'm afraid. This work will be completed at a time when a proposal or agreement is reached.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Burton, for the latest interrogation. I appreciate his answers. My statement is as follows. The scenarios provided for future services are alarming. Even the best case version shows numerous reductions in services and spend, based not on need, but on quota. And the papers raise concerns about legality, deliverability, costs of appeals, impact on reputation, and above all, the impact on children. Yet even this scenario leaves in-year deficits at almost the same level as now. This is a disturbing insight into safety valve, which confirms so many fears about this project. And it fails to address the background to this situation: lack of adequate funding, lack of coherent national schools policy, and refusal to confront the ticking time bomb of the statutory override. Other approaches are possible, which prioritise the experience and well-being of our children. And a more sustainable national policy is surely inevitable. I therefore ask the committee to consider a motion to oppose this approach and reject safety valve. Thank you.
So I'm going to, sorry, it's just, if you don't mind taking a seat, I'm just going to go slightly out of sync. I know we don't usually respond to statements because it's not within the sort of done thing constitution. You've clearly obviously got some wording regarding the motion in mind. It's entirely up to you if we want to, during the meeting, put something together and put it and send it to the members of this committee for us consideration. It's entirely up to you. It's in no pressure, but I just felt reading between the lines there that you had something in mind. And I know that you've done a lot of work on this. You've sort of investigated this to the same degree that very many of us have done also. And therefore, I think if you've made the time to come along to all these meetings, I'm quite happy to have your feedback and your thoughts and what you'd like to see, given certainly that there's no other consultation that's been carried out on this matter. During the meeting's fine. We'll see how the meeting goes, but if there's any wording that you'd like us to consider, then I'm happy to discuss that as well. Without getting political. Thank you. I know that was slightly unorthodox, but I just think credit where credit due. And like as I said, we're very grateful to Ms. Sofianos for making the time to come along to all our meetings and taking interest in this piece of work. Just really quickly, I was quite remiss. Online, we have Sharon Muldoon, who's going to be presenting this report in a moment. We've also got our monitoring officer, Janie Berry, and we've got, again, thank you very much, Mr. Matthew Keir, who's come along, who's done some pieces of work and looking at how this impacts nationally in other areas where they've sort of introduced a safety valve and some of the pitfalls. He was of great help to us last time. I know we had really positive feedback from the committee. So thank you very much once again for coming along. And we also have Mr. Mark Saxby, who's a member of our committee online also. I don't have Teams up, so you may have to shout if I don't hear or see a hands up. So please forgive me if I miss any hands up and you wish to speak. So item number 5 now, DFE safety valve. And so we will invite Sharon Muldoon to present this item. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, Chair. Sorry to interrupt. Can I introduce the item and then Sharon will come in? Thank you very much. Sorry, Chair. Obviously, this is an update to overview and scrutiny in terms of the safety valve and the progression. This is obviously an outline of the work that we've carried out, Children's Services and the Corporate Finance team, regarding the invitation to join the safety valve programme and the work that's been done. We've done a lot of work and against the safety valve programme, the framework is to offer a programme of delivery within 5 years against the safety valve programme. So a lot of work has been done in that area. We have submitted a plan on the 15th of December. We are not going to get any feedback from that plan until January early. We're only on the 3rd of January, so we haven't had any feedback as yet. You'll see from the presentation from the paper, it references 2 scenarios in terms of the work that we've done. First, that provides a financial model of what would we have to do if we were going to deliver that in 5 years, and it sets out the assumptions of what we would need to do to achieve that. And obviously, a lot of those assumptions have been agreed as unrealistic, and that's even from the DFE's point of view, they are unrealistic. There is a second scenario, again, based in extremely challenging assumptions. It is potentially deliverable, but it doesn't balance the DSG. And so further work has been done, and you'll see from the report that Appendix 2, there is a 15 years safety valve submission that has been put forward to the DFE, and the financial model is based on scenario 2, but there's further financial assumptions supporting that scenario in terms of the in-year gap. And one of the things that was taken to the schools forum was a proposal equally about a disapplication of 10 to 11% to support some of that scenario. You'll see that we went to the that we went to schools forum, and you'll see in the report that some of those areas that I've just discussed are there. Obviously, what you've alluded to is the fact that there should be an offer of an agreement. I would say that the DFE are looking for a 5-year plan. We have not submitted a 5-year plan because we do not think that's achievable or appropriate. We are waiting for the feedback. What is also possible within that plan is some capital investment, and you'll see from the report we've also talked about some significant capital investment that we might need to establish and work against that plan. That's not to say that the 15-year plan isn't challenging, but it is more realistic, and more obtainable with regards to where we currently sit in terms of our EHC plans, our advice, and also some of the work that we would need to do with schools. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into further from this, but you will see what's set out in the report.
Thank you. Sharon, did you want to continue on from that?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think in terms of building on from what Kathy has said, just going to flip so that I can see the room. So I'll just maybe describe the process and some of the challenges that we have in the system and how we got to the assumptions that Kathy's outlined, and we so draw attention to the assumptions in a moment. But in terms of explaining the process that we went through, there was working across the system, looking at what's happened in our SEND provision in the last 3 years, particularly where we've seen an absolute increase in the growth of EHCPs. And really understanding the dynamics around both what's happening for our children and young people and the associated cost and the expenditure to that. As outlined in a previous overview in Scrutiny Committee, we do have some behaviours in the system which are driving the kind of the cost bubble that we've seen over a period of time. What we sought to do as a local authority is take the time to understand the figures and the associated monies with that. And the challenge, as Kathy's outlined, was to see if we could balance the budget within 5 years. Working alongside our corporate colleagues, it was very clear to us that we weren't able to address a balanced budget within 5 years. And there's probably 2 areas which are closely linked to the assumptions that are driving that. What was important for us throughout this process is that we were checking and validating our understanding of the system, the numbers within it, and also working with our DfE advisors attached to the safety valve proposal to make sure that we were learning from what's happening nationally, looking at our statistical neighbours, and really checking that we're not missing any assumptions or really clear on our narrative around what's happening in the system. As we move through the process, quite quickly we identified that it wasn't as simple as just reducing the number of new needs assessments. You'll all be aware that we've seen a massive increase in needs assessments over the last 3 years. Our starting position, as has been the case for some safety valve agreements, was looking at how do we reduce the demands in the system, and if we did, what impact would that make? What we found very quickly through the dynamics in BCP is that actually even reducing our number of EHCPs didn't have a significant and material impact on the overall financial outlay, and that was validated by the DfE. In the assumptions that you have before you, we are suggesting that the number of new plans do reduce over a period of time, and I can talk through some of the approaches that we're looking at to support our children, with the aim of supporting our children earlier, earlier incident identification, better support in that early help and prevention space, and making sure that those that do get a plan are on a plan because they need a plan, not because they need a service. So really making that distinction. So the first assumption is that we will have a reduced number of needs assessments, and I can come back to that. But in the papers you have before you, the assumptions are clearly detailed. When we looked at what was then driving the spend and the profile in the system, our system currently has 2 key areas that are driving that cost pressure. The first is our use of specialist provision and our accelerated use of non-maintained specialist provision. So currently, as at November data, 11.6% of our children who have EHCPs are accessing education in specialist provision, and majority of those being, of that 11.6, being through non-maintained specialist, which I know colleagues know that obviously drives significant cost. So if we hold on to our 11.6 percentage for BCP, our statistical neighbours, so that is other local authorities that have a similar demography and size of cohort, are currently at 6.8%. So you'll see that as a system, we have more children, particularly over the last 3 years, that are beginning to access that provision. In terms of what that means for us and in terms of balancing the budget, those children are in that provision, are thriving and engaging, and our ability to move those children out of the system to reduce the cost is limited, and there are some associated issues around the risks that's spent in that. So, sorry, in the report, which identify that actually it isn't as easy as just saying we can actually transfer these children from this provision into maintained, and that will resolve the budget problems and the issue in the pressure we have in the budget. What we do know though, and the safety valve proposal does look at actually how do we promote and achieve greater inclusion into our mainstream so we become in line with our statutory neighbours and start to see the kind of level of EHCPs in mainstream provision that we currently don't see. That's particularly the case for our primary cohort, but not exclusively. The other area in the safety valve proposal, which again, as Kathy's outlined, still does have financial challenges, is around our post-16 provision, where again, we currently, as of November, have 4.3% of our children or young people post-16 in specialist provision, compared against a statutory neighbour statistically average of 2%. So again, the system is slightly out of kilter. So the proposals that we put through were actually, if they're the things that are driving the cost in the system, how can we promote greater inclusion in our mainstream provision, support our mainstream schools, and redirect that direction of travel? Again, I mentioned this at the last time I came to overview and scrutiny. The cost of that is around £38 million a year that leaves maintained provision, universal provision into specialist provision. So the proposal specifically on the assumptions takes you through a number of areas where we're seeing change, proposed change. So the first is a reduction in needs assessments, and that is the position there being that by getting the system right, fewer children will access that, but when they do, they will meet that statutory threshold. We're then looking at working over time with our mainstream estates, our academies and maintained schools, because we see a lot of children transitioning at the move from primary into secondary. So supporting better mainstream provision at secondary, reducing the volume of children in specialist at secondary. And then, as you'll have read in the papers, a detailed set of activities for our post-16 cohort to create additional provision so that our older children or young people with EHCPs can access mainstream provision in their communities alongside their peers. So they're the key thrusts in the plan and the assumptions. As I've said, we did test those assumptions with DfE colleagues in terms of practicality, looking at what's happened elsewhere in terms of capital programmes, and they were the advice from our advisors was that they are the parts of the system that you could affect. So hopefully that gives an overview of the work that we've gone through and background to some of the assumptions. But if I'll leave it there, I'm more than happy to take any more questions.
Thank you. Sorry, can I don't mean to be pedantic, it's more testing my understanding. Just listening to that and then looking at the document, I think I'm getting confused between a mainstream, but particularly what you refer to as a specialist provision,
Yeah.
and what you refer to as a special school provision.
Yeah.
And my
Yeah.
understanding was they were different, but
Yeah.
they seem to be interchangeable here.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure we all had the same
Okay.
understanding,
Yeah.
please. Thank you.
Yeah. So the non-maintained specialist schools are those that are privately registered settings. So our special schools would be maintained or academy special schools, but within a registered school within either the local authority landscape or a MAD, a multi-academy trust, or a single academy trust. The non-maintained specialist provision are then unique specialist providers that predominantly support children with specialist SEND requirements, and that's the private sector part of the system. That's the same up and down the country.
No, that's fine. I think there's probably a couple of ists on where it should just perhaps be special in the document. So like I didn't want to be difficult. I just want to make sure that we all had the same understanding on that.
It's the specialist provision that drives the cost. So special schools, for example, obviously the unit costs are higher than maintained schools, but the significant distribution, that 11.6, is in that very specialist place.
Lovely, thank you. Obviously mindful of the fact that we have some documents which have been considered to, which we'll talk about later, to be exempt. Do we have any initial questions at this moment in time before we go into other documents? So, Councillor Harman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this just sort of feeds on from what Sharon was just saying then. In the report, it's frequently mentioned that under safety valve, more and more children and young people will be educated in a mainstream setting. I saw no mention in any of the documents, unless I missed something, about how schools, how mainstream schools and teachers will be equipped to deal with particularly the psychological experience of many of these children and young people who we already know don't thrive in a mainstream setting. And I just want to know a little bit more detail about how they will be supported from a training point of view. I'm sure there's lots of ways.
Yeah, so I think again I'd come back to the figures. So we are out of kilter with other maintained provision up and down the country in the use of our specialists. So in other areas you will see a higher distribution or penetration of children and young people with an EHCP in maintained provision. But nonetheless, you're quite right that there is, we have the profile that we have, and obviously having a higher number of children with SEND in the classroom and within an individual setting may need a different approach. So we are working alongside our special school head teachers and also alongside our education psychology service to understand how we can support those schools in those places and spaces. Two examples of that. I met with our special school heads this morning and we were talking about outreach provision. So our special school heads, so those again schools that are within maintained or academy trusts, work with our children with special education needs, but we have a programme which we would seek to expand through this work to look at how we can support the environment in our mainstream provision through their specialist skill set, transfer of skills, looking at approach to supporting individual, what their needs are. We do some of that at this point in time already, but we would want to do more. And the idea is to think about how we support those schools and their settings, both at point of identification of need, so that we get the right package for the child, but also think about what that might mean in a classroom where you might have a higher penetration just through a particular year cohort of children with SEND. So we're working with special school heads. We've got some fantastic ideas from special school heads. And indeed, this morning I met with a SEND director of an academy trust to talk about actually how can we better support you and how can we work together as a system, including our health colleagues actually, in terms of support around mental health, our CAMS provision, our speech and language provision, because I think it is the case that certainly from my conversations this morning, teachers would like to keep some of these children in mainstream provision, but we need to make sure we get the offer and the environment right, and that's a systems effort. So the national data would point to this. We should be and could be doing more, but we need to understand our position is where it is and we need to work together around that. The safety valve programme does look at actually how we might create some additional capacity in our outreach provision to improve support. Just one final other thing is I did speak to a head teacher of a primary school just the other side of Christmas, where we were also moving into the landscape of how do we support newly qualified teachers post-COVID, how do we support the wider quality first teaching programme in terms of making sure that we are creating a workforce in our schools, academies or otherwise, to make sure that SEND is everybody's business and we have that inclusive environment. So very much a working with and looking at opportunities to explore and expand our work to date.
Yes, yeah, that's fine.
Thank you for that, Sharon. I'm really pleased you mentioned teachers. As a former teacher myself, and I still have many close friends who are in the classroom, and I know the teaching profession has never been, they're on their knees right now. And, you know, I so many teachers are just leaving the profession in their droves. We're facing a national recruitment and retention crisis. And it worries me that the extra impact that we will be putting on those professionals that we're already asking so much of. I would like to know as well, given that the vast majority of schools within BCP are academies, realistically, how much impact can BCP have, does BCP have in ensuring that the appropriate training and support is in place?
It's a partnership, is the answer. Oh, sorry, Kathy, go on, you go.
Yeah, I mean, as Sharon says, it is a partnership and it is about how we work together, but there's also the issue about how we enable our DFE colleagues, our regional colleagues who support schools, to understand the landscape that BCP is in, and to enable them to support schools and seek some further inclusivity. And so we have been in conversations with how do we do that from a regional basis and support schools. And as Sharon says, it's also about how we get particular schools to support others by outreach work and giving that confidence in terms of how we support and manage children and young people with EHCPs. And so so we're trying to do it at a regional DFE level, as well as a relationship level that Sharon is working with our head teachers and supporting them in that way.
Sorry, I'll stop in a minute. Can I ask what the reaction has been with these conversations that have been happening so far with schools, with head teachers? What has the reaction been from those on the ground who will be at the coalface of this?
I'll let Sharon answer that.
Thank you. So on the 4th of December, we had a SEND head teachers breakfast meeting, where we presented and to talk through with head teacher colleagues about where we are, what we need to do, and what the challenges are across the system. And this is closely aligned to our SEND improvement work. I think and since that time, I've obviously followed up with individual head teachers and or SENCOs or inclusion leads that have reached out to me. I think really positively, there's a genuine will and desire to get this right, and an absolute understanding of some of the tensions at the classroom and really what that feels like and the lived experience of that anxiety and stress that I think you've sort of related in terms of how it feels for head teachers and schools. I do think actually in some cases there's some latent energies and passions to do some things differently, and how we can engage, and particularly around getting the balance right of working with. So in terms of that outreach provision and the local authority offer, really thinking about who's best to do this, who's best to play shape, who's best to look at how we support our workforce. Is that us? Is it a partnership of academy trusts? How might we do that? And I think by starting that conversation about we're in this together and that we need to work together has started to perhaps reignite some areas that perhaps have just felt a little bit frustrated and been on the outside of the system. I think it is true that there is much more that we need to do. It's also really true from the conversations I had with special school heads this morning. It isn't just about the local authority, it is absolutely around the health provision and the health support too. So how we engender and create that conversation to make sure that universal health provision, particularly around our little ones early years, that we're really in speech and language getting that offer right to prevent escalations where it's no longer necessary. So I think we've created a new position. I think we've started some very honest dialogue around where we are, and I suppose an aspect of that is I asked head teachers to invited them to attend some workshops in January and February to be part of solutions focus, working together, thinking about doing things differently, and I've had a really positive response to that. I invited that if heads wanted to give or share examples of where we've got it right or where we've got it wrong as a system, not as a local authority, and we've really taken the time to understand some of those the lived experience of the child, actually, to understand what's happened, when it worked well and when it didn't, and what the blockages are. And we have been able to identify some quick wins, which both at an individual level, but then I've communicated those to the wider head teacher cohort, and I think that's generated a genuine appetite to step into this space and work together. So much more to do, but I am positive about the positive energy that exists in our schools to work together to improve this, and including, finally, the launch of our inclusion quality mark. So really thinking about that setting perspective and how do we hold each other to account to make sure that we are inclusive. And again, had some really important feedback from schools around shaping that a little bit to improve inclusion circles and other activities. So operationally, strategically, much more to do, but a good energy, I think, now, notwithstanding some of the challenges that we've got.
Councillor Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I could just seek clarification of the process around this. I understood it was explained earlier that the application's gone in, we're waiting for the feedback from the excuse me, from the Department of Education, but paragraph 5 of the background in the paper says, following a decision by the Department for Education in January, a further programme of work will take place either implement the proposal or make alternative plans based on the advice and findings by the Department for Education. So my question is, at what point in that process does full council get the opportunity to actually say yes or no to this contract?
To that one, Kathy.
We don't know whether a contract will be proposed because obviously the safety valve was looking at a 5-year plan. We've submitted a 15-year plan. And so we don't know what the outcome of our plan will be. If they come back and there is the ability to think about some capital funding and support, then we'll do some further work. And so until we have a indication as to where we go next, we don't know.
Sorry, can I just get some clarification on that then? Because that's a really good question, Councillor Canavan. My understanding was it wasn't going to come to full council, that actually it was the chief executive was going to make this decision. So it won't be a cabinet process and it won't be a full council process. And the only time it's going to get scrutinised and looked at is when I asked for these meetings, which actually been quite difficult to arrange anyway.
So the safety valve programme, the invite was accepted by the chief exec. We have then submitted a plan. I do not know what the outcome of that plan or what the construct around that will be. It will then be looked at in terms of how we implement that. It might be. So if, for instance, there's a decision that we would want to seek some capital funding, then that would have to be considered in the round. So until we understand what agreement may or may not be on the table, but the actual invite to the safety valve was accepted by the chief exec.
Kind of, yeah, it feels almost like that's in motion whereby no matter what the outcomes on capital funding or not, actually at some point it's going to need wider member engagement. So he wants to come back.
I'll take that answer. Thank you.
Sorry, it's yours related.
It was very related, and again, it's about the process, because I do think it's really important. And the last meeting where we talked about the safety valve, we heard this narrative that this was an invitation by the government, which was taken by the chief executive to whether to take part in this process or not, which was accepted. We were also told at that point that this wasn't essentially a negotiation, and that's kind of what was said in these papers. We put forward proposals, first of all, to try and eliminate the historic deficit within 5 years, which was, as we've seen by the proposals, is just simply not possible, and therefore we've come forward with scenario 2 and maybe now scenario 3, which is being considered by the Department for Education. However, despite hearing that it's not been a negotiation, it strikes me from some of the narrative in the report and from what we've heard from the team that there has been an ongoing dialogue with the department, which has then led us, first of all, to accepting the fact that the first proposal was not only not going to be acceptable to us, but it put forward proposals which were accepted by the department that also were not achievable, and therefore put forward this revised proposal 2, and then potentially the 15-year proposal as well. So it kind of seems to me like it has been a little bit of a negotiation. Now, granted, we won't get the full feedback until we hear back from the Department for Education, but I suppose my question about the process would be, considering the import of these decisions and how they will definitively, no matter which way you cut it, affect the provision of service that they're offering, even if it's just the way it's offered, not necessarily, if we follow through the aspirations, the service level, but that's arguable. What level of elected member input has been part of that process so far, considering it has been kind of a semi-negotiation? So first of all, where, from a portfolio holder point of view, where has a portfolio holder been driving some of these discussions? But secondly, and I think this is a really important thing, in our meeting of the 6th of November, this committee carried a proposal that said that that we asked for the we delegated to the chair, to yourself, chair, to make representations and provide input as part of that negotiating process. So has that taken place as well? So where have the elected members been in the process to date? Oh, it's a very long-winded way of me getting to that question. Apologies.
Yeah, and just for clarity as well, just before I ask you to answer that. So the time frame was the 15th of December. We were going to get the initial process consisting of DSG management plan that was going to go over to the DFE. And then the final proposal was on the 12th of January. So those timescales still, the timescales that you're looking at on the 12th of January for your final proposal. And I'll ask you to answer Councillor Broadhead's point at the same time as well.
Yeah, there have been no negotiations. There have been support officers from the DFE to look at what it is that we might be proposing. They have given a view, but they have not. There has been no consultation and no influence in terms of what we put in or not. So the 5-year plan, we knew it was unrealistic. The decision about whether that went in or not was ours. It wasn't theirs. So there has been no negotiation. So there has been no input by the portfolio holder, because the portfolio holder has been kept up to date, but there hasn't been any negotiations. And we're still working to the timeline. We submitted it on the 15th of December. We're waiting for some feedback, and depending on that feedback, we may or may not put a bid in for some work. I don't know, for some support, and I don't know what the outcome of the submission is going to be at this point, so I have no idea.
Sorry, I'm actually not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to understand, because this is a really important process, and whether we like it or not, the proposal that is being put through on the 15th is a proposal, which, as we understand, will probably not be the accepted. I'm sure the Department for Education will come back and there'll be further time for consideration. But are we saying that to date, the proposal that we are putting forward has had no elected member input into what it looks like?
There have been discussions and some understanding around that.
And I just have to say, we haven't seen that initial proposal either. What we have in the exempt material is an overview. So we still don't actually know, despite asking for this meeting today, what's gone forward to DFE and what it is that we're proposing. So Councillor Burton.
Yeah, I mean, if I could add to that answer, so I've not been involved in any negotiations, because, as we've heard, there haven't been negotiations. I'm being kept up to date. I'm asking questions all the time about how the process is going. I've also felt slightly like I would like to be involved more. However, doing some research, it seems that that isn't, with other local authorities, the portfolio holder hasn't been involved at this stage. And therefore, all I have to do is ask questions and find out what stage we're at.
I'm really sorry, and the reason for saying it is not to be critical. It's certainly not a political point, but it is about the fact that we could end up in a situation that the Department for Education says, "Okay, great, we'll accept your 15-year plan," and as we've heard, unless there is a capital element of that programme, there is literally, it's not a decision for any elected members whatsoever. So to mitigate the lack of elected member involvement, you would have thought that there would be some level of interaction in terms of our proposal that we are putting forward in only a few days' time. And the reason I think that's important, as we've heard from a number of members, you only need to listen to the declarations of interest at the beginning of this meeting to know that there are lots of members, not only of this board, but of the council, that have a deep level of experience in this area that they can input. But also, we are the ones that are elected by our residents to represent their interests. And that invariably, when you're putting forward different scenarios and different proposals, there are considerations that you will want to make and the considerations that you won't want to make. So, for example, as part of scenario 2, either the 5-year or the 15-year option, there is the way that we meet that level of deficit reduction is through provision for a new special school. Might we want to take a political decision that we want to double the size of that to mitigate the problem further, or might we wish to take a decision that actually that's not the right way and we wish to handle it in a different way? These are fundamentally political with a small p decisions that can and should be taken by those that are represented to be here. So that's why I raised the point, because the way it seems that we are kind of sleepwalking into this issue is that we could have an acceptable position put forward, accepted by the department, which essentially none of us, other than complaining about or having ideas about, have had input whatsoever. So that was the reason for putting it forward.
No, that's really interesting, and it does bring me to my points that I was thinking when I was listening to the introduction was, where are the voices of the families and the end users and our vulnerable learners and all of those who are going to be impacted by this? I'm really glad that there's engagement with the schools. We have to have them on board, absolutely. But we have absolutely nothing here from those who are going to be affected by this. And it feels like we're doing it to them and not with them. So I'm really interested in hearing more later, perhaps not now, but the solution focus working differently with the schools. And I'd really like to ensure that we have stakeholders and end users involved in that. And I'm not talking about parent care forums, I'm talking about the appropriate people. Like, for example, Mr. Sofianos, who has a great depth and understanding of this, may, I'm volunteering his time again, but may have some input that he may want to try and make this work. So that might be something that we think about a bit later on. One of the things that I had come to, and I think, Kathy, you know, I'm going to talk about consultation, you know, I'm going to talk about the equalities impact assessment, and I just can't understand how any of this is lawful. I just can't. We have a Supreme Court ruling on the 29th of October 2014, in which a judge has made it very clear that this will now make a real difference in future to the way in which ordinary people are involved in decisions which affect their lives. This is in terms of budget cuts and changes to services to the SEND provision in London. And today's ruling will send a very clear message to all local authorities that they cannot hide away from the true reasoning behind their decisions. They'll be required to give the public more information about the possible options and the reasons why they favour this proposal. Therefore, local authorities should consider, in relation to any public consultation that affects their client group, whether, number one, the consultation sets out the options, number two, explains the preferred options, and number three, details as to why this is the preferred option. A failure to achieve these three criteria may render the policy unlawful. So I'm really pleased to have Janie online, because there's obviously no consideration of the Brown principles. There's no meaningful due regard so far. We know that the judgment of Brown versus Devon County Council cost them 500,000 when that was JR'd. We also know that this is going to go against our own policy. So whoever signs off this decision, be it the portfolio holder, if it goes to cabinet, or the chief executive, they will be going against our policy and therefore are potentially vicariously liable, i.e. they are going against our policy and they will be personally liable. So what advice are you giving to the officers now in terms of their next steps and making sure that we are actually behaving the way that we should be behaving? Sorry, Janie, that was for yourself.
Sorry, I'm having some connection problems. Could you just repeat that? Sorry.
Do you want all of it repeated?
I just missed. Sorry, I've been I'm trying to stay logged in. I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
So I quoted the judgment from the Supreme Court on the 29th of October 2014, where local authority failed to consult with in terms of cuts and changes to their services. This is in some provision.
Yeah.
And the fact that the judge made it quite clear that failure to do so would end up, obviously, with any consultation and policy that's brought about unlawful.
Yeah.
The fact that we've obviously got Brown versus Devon County Council and the Brown principles that have come out of it, which talks about meaningful regard and due consideration. When we talk about, well, this is all written out in our policies, of course, and therefore it makes it quite clear that if any officer or cabinet member which signs off this document veers from that policy, they will be vicariously liable, i.e. they will pick up the financial costs that may be incurred by the council otherwise. So given that there's been no consultation thus far, there's been no options put forward, there's been no consideration of various proposals, what advice are you giving to the officers and to the portfolio holder to ensure that they act lawfully and they don't put the council at risk?
So you appreciate that I'm only like in week 3 of this at the moment, so I would have to take sort of comprehensive instructions from Kathy and Sharon and colleagues, and look at the proposals that are taken and then give quite comprehensive step-by-step advice before any decisions are made. The issues around it is not my job to expose officers to being vicariously liable. So I would have to make sure that every step is undertaken in the best interest of the council and doesn't expose anybody. So I would have to speak to Kathy and Sharon in much more detail and provide sort of a more updated opinion outside of the meeting, I'm afraid. It's just that I'm literally at the start of week 3. And I just need to catch up a little bit more. So I was kindly invited by Sharon and Kathy to observe the meeting this evening, just by way of trying to gain more information as well. So I will look at that in more detail and liaise directly with them.
Thank you. So just say, because obviously we've got members here with various degrees of experience within this. Can you just explain a council's sort of obligations to ensure that they consult before we make any changes to policies or strategies?
Yep, so the council has a responsibility to operate in accordance with the recommended code of good practice on consultation, and the more complex the issue being consulted upon, the longer the consultation period takes, probably to a maximum of around 12 weeks. So or failing that, if there is a requirement for statutory consultation, you have to follow the statutory guidelines around that consultation. You can't do open-ended consultation, so consultation can't be almost like a blank piece of paper saying, tell us what you think. The consultation has to be quite guiding to those being consulted in terms of a scenario, proposed statements, proposed positions, and then following the close consultation. And how we do that as well, how we do consultation has to be equalities compliant as well, so that we recognise the diverse communities that we've got, we recognise the different languages, we recognise, for example, people with visual impairment, hearing impairment, so that they can fully participate. We then have to look at the close of consultation, review the responses, and if there's still more clarity needed, we should not be afraid of going back out to consult for a short period just to ascertain a much clearer position on what the outcomes were, or to narrow the scenario that we're consulting on and put finer details to it. At that point, you would then review it all again and you update your equalities impact assessment as well, and ensure that any decision you make is well-rounded, it's well-reasoned, and it is compliant with the public sector equality duties.
Thank you. So obviously the concern
shall I just add as well that scrutiny, so this meeting this evening, for example, future iterations of scrutiny committees is also classed as good quality consultation, because this is seeking the views of elected members who represent their wards as well. So future meetings such as this of scrutiny would be classed as part of the consultation exercise as well.
Thank you, that's really helpful. I suppose the concern that I have is that we don't have, as requested, the proposal that went forward to DFE in December. We have an overview of a submission. So I am uncertain about the quality of anything that we put forward in terms of scrutiny, because we're not looking at the full information. We're looking at basically here lots of copying and pasting from a DSG management plan, an update admittedly, but we're not looking at the proposal that went forward in December. Does anyone else have any questions at this point? Okay, so one of the things that I was thinking was we don't have the full proposal that we were hoping to look at, and then obviously understand what DFE's response to that would be before you respond on the 12th of January. And we had just had a bit of an informal chat before we started, and are requesting that this is sent through to us, please. And we'll have an adjournment of 10 minutes so that we can have a look at that document in full. So I'll make the request of Ms Hadley.
In terms of confidential or in terms of, so you're asking me to send through the documents that we haven't sent you through in the next 10 minutes?
Yeah, so then we can discuss, so we can actually move on to the document itself. We only have an overview of the submission, and we'd like to see the full submission that was made on the 15th of December, please. Give ourselves 10 minutes to go through it, and then we can discuss that document. And obviously, if that's closed session, that'll be closed session. We can see where we are, but at least we'll be talking to the document itself and we'll be scrutinising that, and then hopefully we can add value, because we're not here just to put you down and castigate you and tell you off. We really do want to make sure this works for all of our families, all of the teachers, and for the staff of BCP as well.
So I would seek an adjournment, and I would seek some counsel with my monitoring officer, because I think it would be a confidential session.
So just to be clear, are we going confidential or exempt?
So it would go into the exempt session.
And that's fine. So if we then have the reasons as to why that would go into exempt session, that's fine. But at least we can read the document and then speak about it accordingly. Thank you. So if we take an adjournment for about 10 minutes, that's okay. Thank you. Sorry, talk about process. Is anyone happy to? Oh, Councillor Canavan, thank you. So if we're happy to make that request, seek an adjournment of 10 minutes, and then we'll have a read of that document and then discuss the exempt part. Thank you. Thank you and welcome back to our Children's and Overview Scrutiny panel today on the 3rd of January. Sorry that the jump took a little bit longer. I think I just need to express our thanks again for the officers for working with us so very quickly and on time to sort of adhere to our request. So that's very much appreciated. I appreciate that there's some information in that we have just received that we would not want to refer to, and I believe the monitoring officer's got some advice on that we can hear in a moment. Monitoring officer, happy to bring you in at this point, but I just wanted to just make it sort of just explain that we do have some questions that would be appropriate for above the line that doesn't refer to the document. So we'd like to ask those, and then hopefully, if that's okay with yourself, understand the reasons for going into exempt business, and if appropriate, then obviously agree to that. But happy to receive your advice at any point now, if you prefer.
I'm quite content, Chair, if you want to continue with the public element of the meeting and ask the questions whilst they're still fresh in your mind.
Yeah, that's go on.
Sorry, through you, Chair. If I could ask a question, it's about the exempt nature of Appendix 2 and the information that we received. I just want to understand why it would be exempt. I mean, I know my way around the above and below the line rules, particularly with regard to individuals and council contracts, etc. But if we're talking about proposals that we are making around service provision or just kind of council finances that aren't necessarily directly relating to individual businesses, I just want to know what the reasons would be that we would go into exempt session for that second bit. You may know more. Apologies, Chair.
Yes, sorry, just so that I understand it, we're talking about agenda item number 2 on the papers that we received in December that were published, rather than the information we received this evening. Is that correct, Councillor Broadhead?
I think, is it a bit of both? I think the papers that we've got in front of us, we've got 2 appendices. Appendix 1, which we've talked about already, which is the scenario 1, scenario 2 that was presented to the some of our external partners, and then what we're looking at, which is the essentially potentially the proposed safety plan submission, which is the 5th, kind of the longer period. I don't even know what I'm allowed to say, or the extended plan, and then we've had some further detail. I'm getting the impression that that part of the discussion, particularly around detail of those documents, should be exempt. Just don't know why.
Can I sorry, Monitoring Officer, a new clarification. Can I ask you to separate the 2 then? So we've got that a piece of exempt item that was agenda item number 2, which I was going to query about the appropriateness of that being exempt, and then obviously the document we received within the last few minutes, and understanding that exempt nature of the content, please.
So the document that you just received during the short period of adjournment is a very detailed document, and I'm satisfied that it does meet the criteria of Schedule 12A subsection 3, which directly relates to information relating to the financial or business affairs of the council. There is quite a considerable in-depth detail in the document that you've received during the short adjournment, which means that, well, I'm satisfied on having quickly perused the same, that there is the need to keep that in the private domain outweighs the need to put it in the public domain at this stage. The reason for that is that the details concern go into much more detail, which could impact the reputation of the council. It could damage a relationship with stakeholders without prior preparation, support, advice and guidance being given to key stakeholders. And on that basis, I'm satisfied that when I've reviewed the public paper and the papers shared with you during the exempt session, I'm satisfied that there is sufficient information in the public domain, that the public are satisfied on the nature of the discussion available, the nature of the information that is being shared with you, and are able to gain a good understanding of the questions that you're considering this evening relating to the safety valve. So on that basis, my recommendation is that the document shared with you during the adjournment remains an exempt document and should be debated in a private session or an exempt session. I'm not quite sure of the phraseology just yet, but in a confidential setting with the exclusion of the press and public, should you wish to debate it. Chair.
Thank you. That's really useful, though, of course, there are legal differentiations between what is an exempt and what is confidential. So again, I'm really sorry to pick you up on being pedantic, but I think we just need to understand if it's confidential, we have no choice. If it's exempt, then obviously we understand the reasons and we've taken a vote on that.
Yeah, I apologise for that, Chair.
No, it's okay.
Different councils use the different phraseology, and I'm just not there yet on BCP's sort of phraseology. So I do apologise for that if I've caused a confusion.
No, not to. And sorry, I just I'm just referring to Local Government Act and obviously how they define those words. In terms of agenda item number 2, though, that was in the published papers but was kept exempt. You've could you just explain why they should, however, be exempt? You've used paragraph 3, and I'm still trying to understand how that would undermine, jeopardise either A, the council, or B, any stakeholders that we would work with. So again, not the document that we've just received, but the appendix 2 in the papers that were published.
I'm just looking, just bear with me a moment. So I think this is where I'm in difficulty because I don't actually have easy access to that document. So because I'm just struggling with the modern.gov permissions.
Okay, Jenny, can I advise the monitoring officer the exempt paper that you received is the same as the summary narrative in the document I've just sent you. So it's exactly the same.
Thank you. So yes, so my reasoning stays the same. If it's exactly the same document, my reasoning stays the same.
No, they are the inclusion of that summary is in the document we just received in the adjournment. I'm talking literally just about the overview summary. And from my understanding, if we're going to use that part for paragraph 3, we can, sorry, I sent this out, that German's information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, which includes the authority holding that information, so BCP Council. And it's only if the disclosure of this information gives someone an advantage over the council, but we know they're negotiating with the DFE, and I'm sure, I would hope the DFE wouldn't want to take advantage over the council and its residents, and only if disclosure should prejudice the council in the negotiations. And that's the bit that I'm trying to understand, is if we refer to the agenda item number 2 in the published papers, how that has to be below the line. I'm not talking about the papers that we received in the adjournment.
So I'm working on the basis that it is more or less the same information that Cathy has just outlined that is in the 2 documents. The reason why I think that the information should fall within subsection 3 of Schedule 12A is that this is a very sensitive subject. The information has been shared with the DFE, and there is an ongoing dialogue with them, which is confidential. However, the wider audience and the stakeholders are vulnerable young people, a parent carer forum, etc. And in order to put a lot of information in the public domain at this point, I feel without any appropriate engagement and support and advice to them would be damaging to the stakeholder relationships. And so on the basis that in order to allow Cathy and Sharon and their teams to make informed steps going forward about whatever eventuality it is, that needs to take time. And for the purposes of this meeting, I'm satisfied that the information should remain in the sort of subject to Schedule 12A, subsection 3, and go into a private debating session for the rest of this meeting. It is very difficult for me to go into more details without actually going into the confidential into private session, as I'm conscious I don't want to give any more details away of what is in these documents that have been shared with you in a private meeting.
Yeah, I was going to move on, but Councillor Broadhead.
I was just going to suggest that we move on, Chair. I'm not sure I 100% agree, not least because of the, many of our concerns on the committee are the fact that if this submission is accepted, it essentially becomes part of council policy with none of the consultation that the monitoring officer has suggested precludes it being in open session. So, but I think if we want to try and get on with the job at hand, we might just well need to move to confidential setting, because I think what we're hearing is even the outline of the submission itself is, in the monitoring officer's view, exempt information.
No, absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to suggest. Obviously, you've all received the information as to when we should not go under the line. And the default position is that all information should be public, unless, of course, certain thresholds apply and is met. So we'll take a vote. I will need someone. I'm happy to propose that we do go below the line. Of course, this is a free vote. You can vote any way you like. If someone wants to second it, and then we can take a vote. Sorry, Councillor Canavan.
There are still sorry, I'm happy to support that, Chair, but there are still issues that are in the document which are not below the line, yeah, which I would still like the opportunity to ask questions on at some point.
Yeah, should we do that first and then just think about going up below the line thereafter? So, Patrick, do you want to kick off with the first question, and to whom would you like to ask that question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this relates to paragraph 28 of the papers that we've had before us, and that sets out the main risks associated with the scenario 2, and it itemizes those risks A through to F. I was kind of hoping that when it got to paragraph 29 and it talked about the next steps, that it might actually address some of those risks and explain what steps are going to be taken in order to mitigate those risks. I don't mind taking risks. I've taken a lot of them in my time, but it's about mitigating them, isn't it? And there's no danger in taking risk, providing you have taken the appropriate steps to mitigate any potential damage. I can't see anywhere in this paper, or indeed very quick perusal of the document that we just had, any explanation as to what steps the council is going to take to mitigate those risks, other than, a bit more money from the schools block funding, and a little bit of tweaking of timelines. I can't see what other steps the council are proposing to address those risks.
Absolutely. Do you mind if I just add to that, to save asking a question I was going to ask later, in terms of, obviously there's metrics attached to the outcomes that you want to achieve as part of this contract, which would include these sort of A to F, and obviously if you don't meet those, as Patrick's alluded to, those risks, but the bigger risk is we obviously then don't fulfill the contract, and then we don't get that money and the contract, and the relationship with DfE becomes very difficult. So the first part, and then the second part, if you wouldn't mind answering that. Thank you, Kathy.
What we have to understand, this is a whole system, a system that we're working in, and so some of those risks will need to be mitigated by others in the system. We can assist and support. So if we think about EHCP demand, how do we support and manage that, and what the mitigations for that? But it's a whole system. It's about, in terms of, if you look at the number of parental requests for assessment that come straight into our system without going through schools, it's about how we help, as Sharon pointed out, and I think Sharon went through some of these earlier on, in terms of working with schools and others and health to enable us to mitigate some of those areas. And so as the plan goes forward, they will be put on a risk register and they will be monitored, as you've outlined, because obviously if we do not, when I say we, is the system, if we do not meet some of the key performance indicators that are set if they get set or agreed by a plan, whatever plan that will be, then there will not be a drawdown against any offer that the DfE may or may not have offered us.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Canavan?
Well, kind of. If you know, in another life, when I've done risk registers, you firstly look at the probability of that risk. And if you think about EHP demand remains higher, the chances for EHP demand remaining higher is very high. So yes, I understand, you know, there is a cumulative approach, if that's the right expression, probably not, but you know, a combined approach to ensure that you tackle it. But what if you don't? And that, you know, it's about how do you manage the risk in a situation where the chances of the EHP, I never get these initials right, that those things going up is considerable. And I'm concerned that I do, you know, you've got absolutely all of the information, but in terms of planning, I kind of would have expected to see a bit more detail, really.
There is behind this a very detailed, in terms of a send plan against the improvement plan, against which the DfE advisor supports and manages the service and our counterparts in health. And so there is work that sits behind this, which goes across the whole system. This report was not a full-blown plan, and so but they would be part and parcel of the work that we would do and we would continue to do.
So are you able to provide then, if you've done that work, greater reassurance to Councillor Canavan once we go below the line, or is that the final response to that query? Because it's a valid report. I mean, obviously, we want to ensure this works. It has to work. It has to work for families, it has to work for schools, it has to work for BCP, for professionals. So are you able to elaborate on that if we were to talk about this later in an exempt environment?
We can talk about it under the exempt item.
So, but would it add value to that answer is what I'm trying to understand.
I don't know. I cannot speak for the councillor.
Okay. Any other questions from anyone? Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just focusing around the current appeals, the percentages of those that are, you know, won by those that are appealing decisions. 98% is what I understand to be about right for that. Talking of risks and concerns, you know, it's around the additional appeals and further costs of the council that is going to clearly be an issue. How much has that been factored in, and how seriously are we taking, considering the impact of what is likely to be a certainty of further tribunals, further appeals being won, and a significant cost to the council?
And that's in the information, that is a risk.
Talks about escalations, and I just wanted a bit more of an understanding around what that term refers to, and if that's relating to kind of a one size fits all approach to the HCP process in terms of children's conditions or diagnoses changing over time. And I just wanted a bit more context on what that actually means, please.
Okay, I'm going to bring Sharon in. So you're talking about paragraph 20, section L.
L, sorry, I think I said R. Yes, L. Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of what we're talking about there, so obviously every child with an EHCP has an annual review where we look at, as a partnership with the parent, child, etc., young person, if they're of a certain age, where we look at, is the plan meeting need, are we meeting the outcomes and aspirations for that child and young person? Do we need to make any amends to plan? So in our financial assumptions, we haven't factored in a greater change into escalations of plans. In fact, in some areas, we also need to look at maybe plans that can be reduced or stepped down because maybe needs are met and needs have changed over time. So in terms of that particular category, we haven't changed the current formula that looks at amends to plan. So in terms of amends to plan, it does vary obviously, but around about 10% of plans will be at the annual review will require an amend to plan. It is normally an increase of provision, but it can be a decrease of provision. But I think in terms of that point, it's basically saying we haven't adjusted the current run rate of activity one way or the other through this. Where that links into the proposal is clearly through the section we're identifying that we have more children in the primary state staying in mainstream into secondary. You might see an appeal or an escalation around that, but we haven't factored that in because we're working on the basis that we'll have a more inclusive system. Remembering that not every parent wants a specialist provision. Some parents actually want their children to go to mainstream provision. And we have heard, back to the earlier discussion, have absolutely had representations from parents where from times they've felt that their child isn't welcomed in mainstream and that they're pushed out into the specialist when they don't necessarily want that. So it's taking that balanced view. With regards to appeals, just looking at the data before me, our November data in terms of appeals won on behalf of the local authority, that's around 13%. It does change and it is, it changes over time and it's obviously individually case dependent. What this process is looking at though is in terms of understanding what are the child needs and how can we work together. So in terms of that demand and the capacity, did mention it earlier, but in November 46% of our new needs applications were directly into the local authority. Conversation I had with a very experienced SEND director from Academy Trust this morning was many parents don't go to schools for a conversation because they think that they can get more sooner by going directly to the local authority, where absolutely there are situations where we think it'd be more helpful and beneficial for parents to work with schools and have that conversation or their early years setting. So it isn't about reducing or stopping services, it's about really early identification of need and early intervention processes. Furthermore, just around the risks that previous colleague referenced in section 20, the SEND improvement plan that Kathy talks about has 8 key priorities and it ranges through a whole system change. And what we're looking at, priority number 3 in there is about early help and early identification, early intervention. How can we work sooner, better with children and families to prevent the escalation of need? Because we know often that it's the escalation that results into a needs assessment. So that improvement plan is very detailed, and should the proposal be taken forward, of course we would link across to that. The final point to make is, as Kathy's made, is to reinforce this isn't a system that we are uniquely in control of as a local authority. There are a number of partners obviously playing in this space, our schools, our health provision, the voluntary community sector, etc. So it is looking at that whole system approach and the demand management, some of which the local authority can control, but some of which we can't. And colleagues that will have children or loved ones in the system will know about their rights through the SEND Code of Practice. So I think it just points to those, but I'm sure at a later point the SEND improvement plan would give much more granular detail of the actions we're taking to support the whole system, ultimately to improve outcomes for children.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I know, Councillor Moriarty, you were next. There was a question that I really wanted to ask, and it just really neatly leads on from what Sharon just said. The first was health, but also then the outcomes. When you talked about at the beginning that 11.6% in specialists compared to our statistical neighbours of 6%, and then the 4% to 2% comparison, in that, what work was done when we look at the quality of the education and the attainment that those pupils are achieving, where our statistical neighbours have less in specialist provisions and more pupils in a mainstream?
So we haven't done that level of identification, but it'd be more around obviously having, we have good and outstanding providers in our place, so we need to be confident around that. We could look into that, but there's nothing, we haven't taken the data to that level of detail, and I think we work on the premise that our mainstream providers would be able to provide that level of appropriate level. And so what are the specialist needs of children that are being met by the independent sector, and how can we support that in our mainstream provision post 16, so that our SEND children, young people can learn alongside their peers.
So I suppose therefore the biggest risk in all of this is we haven't looked at outcomes and we don't know what this is going to mean. We're hoping and we're praying that these provisions will be the very best. And I appreciate we've got some fabulous schools in our area and we are extremely fortunate to do that. However, we don't know how a SEND cohort will be able to thrive and meet their potential within those provisions just yet. And we haven't looked at our statistical neighbours in terms of attainment and what this, but basically the impact of some of this work will mean for them. Is that something that you are going to do? And if so, when will you do that?
It wasn't on the work plan, but we can absolutely look at it. But what we would be absolutely looking at is for that post 16 provision, where are they accessing specialist provision? What does it look like? What are the needs? How can we work with our providers to make sure we have the right quality of curriculum in our mainstream settings in order to support that and grow that? And indeed, obviously in the proposal, we're talking about creating our own provision through that capital development programme of work and making sure that we set the standards for excellence. So we can do it, but obviously we design for excellence, and that's exactly what we do in that increasing capacity space.
Thank you. The other thing that you then spoke about was health. And obviously, so much of the success of this is really reliant on our health offering and that provision and the continuity of that as well as the quality. So what discussions have we had with ICB so far in terms of when we've developed this package and the proposal that went off on the 15th of December to ensure that we can bring about those changes?
Kathy, can I just reference the meeting that I had with the special school heads today, absolutely looking at that particular incident, just to give feedback in terms of what our schools are telling us and how we'll work with health, and then pass over to you, Kathy, from a SEND Improvement Board point of view. So I think I referenced earlier today, this morning we met with a group of special school heads and also head teachers in the maintained estate that provide resource-based provision for children with special education needs. There were 3 areas of the meeting, but the first area was understanding health and getting from their perspective, what's working well, what do we need to improve on, and how can we better support our children and people in that mainstream provision as per the safety valve proposal. What was really clear there was really making sure that we have the right level of health engagement in our education, health and care plans, and that particularly post-COVID, children from an SEMH point of view, avoiding emotionally based school avoidance, that we really put that therapeutic health support in. So I'm yet to type up the notes from the meeting, but we've identified from special school heads, you have to bear in mind it was 8:30 this morning, so I can't recall them all, that there are a list of areas where they want us to work with health, and they believe that more could be done to improve the health pathways and reduce delays. So I have those. They were in a number of areas: speech and language, the neurodiverse pathway, but also looking at particular post-COVID issues really around children's self-esteem and engagement with school and access to CAMS and the pathways around that. So I'm more than happy to share those in terms of the key thematic areas. The follow on from that is obviously now I will share that through Kathy, and we'll take that to the improvement board so that we get that full partnership support. Because what was very clear listening to health colleagues is, yes, obviously there's an education part of the education, health and care plan, but sometimes the health part can be just as important for a child to actually be able to engage in their education, and making sure that we've got that balance of provision right. So hopefully that satisfies a little bit, but Kathy, I'll pass over in terms of how that plays out at the improvement board through the improvement plan.
So obviously the colleagues from ICS are part and parcel of the SEND Improvement Board, which is chaired by the DFE advisor, John Coughlin. We also have colleagues from NHSE at the board who participate and support. We are working very closely with our health colleagues to understand the landscape and the need and what work needs to be done. They are beginning to really look at that, and they have set up their own SEND improvement programmes in terms of that. They are also working very much with the Parent Carer Forum in terms of consultation and supporting that work. And so they are very much around the table. I think at times it's supporting our health colleagues to understand the lived experience rather than a contractual experience. And I know that they are working really hard to support in that agenda.
I'm really sorry to push back, and I mean this in the most nicest way. I genuinely am trying to be helpful and more of a critical friend, but what I'm trying to understand in all of this is what work we've done with health to guarantee and secure that delivery of services, because all of this really hinges on health playing their part, and you know how I feel about health and how absence there being at times. But so much of this relies on health and their sign-in and their buy-in to this. And a final proposal is going to go in on the 12th of January. And I still don't understand that health are completely committed and what they are offering and absolutely signed up to do that. I appreciate you talking to them. I appreciate you having these discussions. But and nowhere have I said this is what they're going to deliver, and this is why we can be absolutely sure that these risks in paragraph 28 won't unravel.
I would suggest perhaps health colleagues come and discuss that with owners.
No, I absolutely agree. I think what we're looking for is that reassurance that this is secure, that you've mitigated as many risks as you can, and that we have that health commitment. But I'm not hearing that.
I don't have any official because I do not have management responsibility for health. They are managed by the NHSE. They're not managed by the DfE. We can inform health and support health to understand their role in this work across that leadership system. But also they have competing priorities. And so it's for them to decide what they're doing in that space. We can ensure that we are very much informing them what we think they should be doing in that space, but it's for them to deliver that area.
Councillor Canavan. Oh, so I'm really sorry. Do you know what? I keep forgetting. Councillor Moriarty. I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of queries which have partially been answered. In terms of COVID, I think, you know, with the kind of outcomes that children have been having throughout COVID, are we not likely to actually be seeing more of a need for EHCPs as opposed to fewer? So that would be just one comment that I would have. And I don't know if any work's been done, but just anecdotally, I hear an awful lot about an awful lot of children actually having very significantly increased needs, really, and absenteeism, etc. And actually we're going to need more EHCPs. And I wondered if that has been factored in. The other thing, if I may, is I'm looking at 29B 1 and 2. And I don't know if this is something we need to speak about later under the line, is that the expression? But do the schools have this excess funding that they can return to us? And my next steps, 29B 1 and 2. Is that?
So yes, in terms of COVID, there has been an impact in terms of increased needs for children and young people. It's about our delivery, not just us, but also health in terms of supporting and managing those needs, whether that's through an EHCP or early help through SEND support. But it's a national issue that's being addressed. With regard to the schools block funding and transfer, we are able to ask for a disapplication of that funding. The schools forum will take a considered vote on that. They may or may not decide to do that disapplication. We can then seek permission from the Secretary of State to deliver that. And so there is mechanisms for that. So the money is there, but it would be a disapplication from money that we assign to schools back into the high needs block.
And just to clarify, if that's okay, so we essentially would be having to take money away from the funding we've agreed with schools, and in turn we're asking them to do more.
So
See,
so the funding that we have through the DSG, we then distribute through the funding formulas to schools. There is an opportunity for us always to ask for a disapplication of 0.5%. We are now requesting or supporting them to consider a 10 to 11% disapplication. I guess there is that conversation with schools about if we do not resolve the issue that way, what are the other things that we can do to support them? If you think about the finances that go into our deficit, the deficit is what is it that we can help and support schools, and we can, you know, our money could be spent in different ways. And so how can they come up? And we've had conversations, Sharon's had conversations with schools about what could they do differently so we could support them better financially to deliver, so we're then not overspending on the DSG.
and if I may, I think we've just gone full circle with kind of the conversation that you started the conversation off with, Emily, about stress and anxiety and teachers already being on their knees and school leaders, etc. So I suppose it is about the increased risk.
So if I could come in there, because I don't think it's exclusively about that. So the meetings that I have had today and will have tomorrow morning are looking at working with schools. So some of our schools, for example, our primary schools, may have a reducing PAN, pupil admission number, which means they may have capacity to do some different things and are willing to do some different things. That might be through a resource-based provision. It might be through some specialist partnership work between schools. So whilst, you know, notwithstanding what we've said around our current level of EHCP penetration, there are absolutely schools and head teachers and academy trusts that want to look at how we might create additional or different provision that will be at a lower unit cost. And that's not about reducing our standards, it's about keeping our children in our mainstream provision alongside their peers. So the changing demography, which is also being taken into consideration when we look at increasing demand, because obviously, colleagues, I'm sure you're aware, we have a falling primary role. We're looking at what options that might provide in the system to change the nature of some of our places and spaces to be more inclusive for our peers. So whilst there is that stress and tension in the system, and we do hear that and we acknowledge that, as I've said at the start of the meeting in that very the overview session, we also have some really exciting opportunities about resource-based provision or development of specific units looking at thematic needs or designated needs for children and people. And we're doing that in partnership with schools. We're not doing it in a distressed fashion. We're doing it in an exciting, enabling fashion to increase inclusion across our school estates, academies or otherwise.
But I think that just brings us back to the offering that will be providing. And obviously we know that therapies are provided in specialist schools, and that's part of that whole holistic approach of education meets health meets, you know, other sort of thriving therapies that are required. And this is the bit that really concerns me, is the fact that we can support all of this, and I don't think there's a parent out there who wouldn't, if they could, have their child in a mainstream provision close to their homes, if they could. It's the fact that if we don't meet those targets, then we've got huge problems with DFE. We can't meet those targets if we're not getting those therapies and that more health provision in those schools. And this whole plan is based on getting children in mainstream schools away from specialist provisions where they have those therapies. And that's the bit I'm really hoping that you can square that circle off for me. But I'm kind of almost pleading here a little bit, saying please make sure there's an answer here. Please don't say this is what we want to do, but please make sure we've got a fallback to make sure we can do it.
Yeah. So at our SEND improvement board, sorry, Kathy, I can't always see whether would you like to carry on, Kathy?
Carry on, Sharon.
Thank you. So at our SEND improvement board, we have school representation from primary, secondary and our special estate. And of course, I've met with colleagues earlier on this morning. that there are some amazing teachers and head teachers there who will talk very passionately about how they can work in partnership with mainstream provision in terms of that inclusion, creating a sense of belonging, creating the conditions for children to thrive by making adjustments for individual children and or within the overall school establishment and setting. So I'm again, and maybe at a future session we can perhaps see if colleagues would come and talk to that, because that's about not us as a local authority doing that to the system. It's about us saying, how can we work together to better make the best use of our resource, but also for those children who can stay in our mainstream, stay in mainstream. So that is a developing piece of work, and as I've said, we've got a lot of schools leaning into that and reaching out in terms of what that might look like. And as I've said, the changing demography provides some opportunity and appetite to do that in a way that perhaps wasn't there historically. The conversation that Kathy's referenced in terms of our relationship with health, we are very clear, it's that change agent role, pushing and hard as fast as we possibly can in terms of what health need to bring to that agenda and the lever that the improvement board provides for us in that space. So more than happy to come back at a future point, but it's absolutely in this plan of work, and this plan of work isn't around deficit, it's absolutely about improving the outcomes for our children. So hopefully that reassures a bit. The work is developing, and we can bring that back at a various juncture, but perhaps also see if it'd be more powerful still if you could hear it from some of our head teachers that are part of this journey with us.
I don't think it's the head teachers I'm concerned about, is the health offering. And I just wonder whether the 12th of January is too soon, because we're going to be defining metrics against which DfE will measure the authority to make sure that we're meeting those. And we've got no commitment or reassurance from health saying that they can provide the assistance that's required so that we don't get those penalties. And I think once it starts to unravel, this contract's going to be really hard to get back on track again. Just a really quick question from me. Councillor Broadhead asked a question at the very start, but I don't think we got an answer in terms of how much the bailout is. Traditionally, other authorities have covered off most of their deficit. How much are we looking to cover off with this one?
We haven't had an offer. So we haven't asked for a particular sum. We haven't had an offer.
Oh, sorry, they might be back. They're very interchangeable. Okay.
That's the first time anybody's ever said that. Sorry. No, I just wanted permission to ask the DAF question for the evening, if that's okay. So to help me understand the way in which health are going to assist you, it would be helpful to me to know who in health you're talking to. I don't mean like names. I mean, which bit of the health, myriad of organisations is it that you're having contact with?
So we're having contact with the ICS, the hospital trusts. We've got a place-shaped partner from health who works with us. So at the SEND board, we probably have about 5 members of the different areas. We have providers who sit on that, because I think they all offer different areas of work that we need them to support. They are very front and central to the plan that we're putting together. That plan would be over in terms of that wider SEND agenda, not just the safety valve. They are supported by NHSE to deliver on that plan. And so there's some weight behind that. It's not my weight, but there is weight in the system to enable that to be delivered or supported to be delivered.
Okay. I think we can go below the line in a moment, but just before we wrap up this bit, I think what I'm hearing is there's been lots and lots of work, and there clearly has been lots of work. We've seen the data that you've sent over, and I say this every time, I'm really appreciative of how much work is going into trying to sort this out, to put it crudely. But at the moment, we don't know about attainment. We don't know the outcomes for families in other authorities to say that this can work. We've got no bailout offer request in terms of what are the pros, because there's feels like there's a lot of risks, but we don't know what the financial outcome is at the moment. And we don't know if any of it's going to work because at the moment we haven't got a health commitment. And that's just, I'm just getting, I'm really sorry I don't know your name, I'm just getting a nod there from the front there. And it feels really uncertain and it feels quite scary. And I'm trying to understand what are the merits of going into this contract, given final proposals are on the 12th. And I'm not really seeing very much. And I just wondered if you could reassure me on that.
I feel, Chair, that we've spent the majority of this evening reassuring you or trying to reassure you. I don't think I said or any of us said that we didn't have health's commitment, because we can't guarantee that, but we do have health around the table.
What we don't have though is the metrics of health saying we can offer this, this and that to ensure that we can have those mainstream provisions set up to meet those targets that you're trying to meet.
As I said, I cannot speak for health, but I do know they're around the table and we do have a plan and they're being supported by the NHSE to deliver.
Okay, I don't have any questions at the moment. If anyone else has got some.
Not a question, Chair, but just a reflection or a statement from my perspective in terms of what I get is this the mainstream provision a lot, you know, the terms we're using around our children being alongside their peers in mainstream schools and that inclusivity. But the sort of things I've made notes of and spoken about with someone around this, around that actually the mainstream school culture that we have now, that very results driven, that attendance driven, that very structured, less flexible, sorry I'm using really rubbish words here, but we don't have a school system that flexes for our children that need to have that learning journey. And Mr. Keir, I think, I don't know if he's still with us, but I know when he joined our last call, I asked him what his thoughts were about a local authority of the size of ours getting involved in the implications, and he said something along the lines of that the local authority only have their feet held to the fire for financial element as opposed to delivery of the actual support that's needed for that child or our children. And you know, a good point that has been raised by again someone I've been discussing this with around the safety valve plan targets, you know, this financial element very heavily, but no sort of targets around the improvement to the psychological experience of our children. So I guess it's me voicing what I'm taking away and the concerns that I see around this, the terms we use for inclusivity and the goal to get the majority of these children into mainstream schools. But I think the fundamental problem is the school system itself is not fit for purpose for a lot of these kids that we are expecting to be able to be part of that process. And the final thing is I as part of that mainstream school culture, as much as we're getting a lot of positivity and I love a pragmatic view from schools, I think deep down they still worry about these children being in their schools that they can't fully support, that will impact their attendance and their exam results. And I just hope that we can merge all of these things together to make this work somehow, because I appreciate the situation we are clearly in, but I echo your comments and sentiments, Chair. Just feels very scary at the moment and very grim reading in terms of reports. And again, I acknowledge and appreciate all the hard work that's gone into it, but just extremely concerning. That's all. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think this must be said. It's not me that you're trying to reassure. It's anyone who's actually part of this journey, whether it be that professionals, families, or the peoples themselves. I think we're at a point now where we can perhaps potentially discuss going below the line if there's anything in that data that we saw earlier. I'm happy to propose that if someone's happy to second it.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Canavan, and all those in agreement? Yeah, so yeah, thank you.